Jennifer Rose stepped through the gates of the religious women's college known as Emily, as if she were entering another universe. The stone walls and manicured lawns around her gave the illusion of peace, but there was already tension in the air, as if there was a certain caution hidden behind every welcoming glance. The first steps along the narrow paths to the classrooms were like exploring a labyrinth, where every turn concealed new rules. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her fingers were trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. After all, here every girl was as if in a cage, where religion served as a reason for strict control. In the college hall, under the bright light of the stained glass windows, Emily met the discipline officer, Edward Sloan. His cold, piercing eyes instantly marked out another's soul, and his smile was pretentious, like a carefully calculated gesture in the theater. His tone was polite, but every word seemed to make invisible shackles stronger. "Here we guard the order of sanctity," he said with such conviction, as if anyone who disturbed the harmony deserved immediate punishment. Emily knew that behind the mask of goodwill there was a steel fist of the system that would not allow her to reveal the truth without a fight. The hallways of the college had their own quiet life, but without the bubbling laughter or bright colors. Meeting Sister Annabelle Montgomery revealed an even more terrifying side to the place. Her charisma and power were tools for instilling fear. Annabelle's voice was melodic, like a spell, but there was a threat hidden within it, as if every word she spoke made the soul tremble. She masterfully played on feelings of guilt and shame, skillfully manipulating the girls. Her eyes showed the certainty that true salvation was possible only through complete submission. In the first hours, Emily had already realized that this college was not just an educational institution, but a monastery of strict discipline, where spirituality became a pretext for the suppression of the individual. Every rule seemed born not to protect, but to control. Students were forbidden to talk about their feelings, and letters home were carefully checked and often not even delivered to their addressees. Fear seemed to be deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life. Among Emily's new acquaintances, Allison Hartwell stood out. The girl was plain and quiet, like a shadow that was easy to miss. Only her eyes showed the hidden pain, hidden behind the walls of isolation. Emily felt a desire to help, as if the elite wall of the cold college could not hide the truth about the suffering of these girls. Allison did not open up right away, but a spark of trust was already awakening in her. A fragile but important alliance was emerging between them. Emily soon witnessed her first dramatic incident, the confiscation of a student's personal diary. It was more like a public humiliation ritual, with the girl standing there, clasping her empty hands, her eyes cast down in utter shame. Sister Annabelle sat over the victim with an air of authority, her words cutting like a cold blade. At that moment, the tension in the air reached its limit, and Emily's heart began to beat faster, feeling that she had entered a dangerous path. An inner voice repeated, "You must be strong for them." As Emily delved deeper into the system, she uncovered more and more shocking facts. The girls were being abused, not only mentally but physically as well. Secret conversations, stolen letters, and frightened glances inspired her determination. The truth had to come out. Allison's words, dropped in a confidential conversation, were woven into the fabric of the investigation like threads leading to the revelation of the entire underbelly of the drama. "We can't trust anyone," she whispered, her eyes reflecting fear and loneliness. But the system was not idle. Edward Sloan began to suspect the presence of a stranger within its walls. His interrogation was cold and penetrating. Each question seemed to be trying to uncover Emily's secret beliefs and weaknesses. At this point, she had to use all her skill to not give herself away, while trying not to show the tremor in her voice. Sloan skillfully played the game, setting traps, but her persistence and strategic approach maintained the balance between Emily's mask and the real Jennifer. Sister Annabelle, feeling threatened, increased the pressure. Her cold words and gestures forced her to humility, forcing the heroine to go through a public repentance designed to break her will. But Emily was ready for this test. The hidden camera on her wrist turned on at the right moment, and a signal for help rushed out to the world outside. Her heart was pounding wildly, but her mind remained sharp because she knew that the fate of many was being decided now. Law enforcement officers soon descended on the campus. The arrests of discipline officers, including Edward Sloan and several of the righteous, were a triumph of justice, a long-awaited conclusion to this dark chapter. The girls who had suffered struggled to find the words to describe their experiences, and their testimony became the most important piece of evidence. Jennifer, though frozen with emotion, felt the weight of responsibility slowly dissipate, giving way to hope. After the events, in the quiet of her room, Jennifer received a letter from Allison. The student's words were heartfelt and full of gratitude, as well as a quiet hope for a brighter future. This message became a symbol of the fact that the fight was just beginning. The camera slowly pulled back, showing Jennifer getting ready to go on a new journey, where her courage and persistence would again be required. So ended the first page of the story, and once again the moment of truth had arrived. What was behind the next door in a world where good and evil were intertwined in an unclear game of power? Emily was preparing to take another step, because the real test was only just beginning. Dangerous liaison. Jennifer Rose stepped into the front garden of the cozy but stern college with a heavy sense of responsibility. Under the name Emily, she had to not only survive among the students and teachers, but also win their trust. The first days were testing, and the walls seemed alive, absorbing every whisper and every glance. Despite the wide range of rules and rituals, it seemed that something much deeper and deadlier was hidden behind the official disciplinary orders and religious sermons. Under the weight of constant surveillance, Jennifer slowly made connections. She paid particular attention to Allison Hartwell, a quiet, shy girl whose eyes hid more than her timid smile could openly convey. Allison seemed a prisoner of her own silence, but there was a silent resistance to her. Slowly, the girl began to let down her barriers, trusting her new teacher more than anyone else in the group. Next to Allison stood Riley Winters, a much more flamboyant character, with a spark of defiance that could seem like a noisy challenge to the system. Riley was Jennifer's beacon, the key to understanding the inner workings and interactions of the righteous with the students. Her protesting looks and sharp remarks were barely audible over the noise of strict control mantras, but for Emily, they opened up a new level of understanding. The first alarm came when Allison carefully told of a secret meeting where Cassandra Venture and Miriam Quinn, two guardians of the system, enjoyed the process of submission through the most sophisticated methods of guilt and shame. This scene was written not in words, but in gestures of accusation, the gleam of the eyes and the cold tones of voices, when every word of the other instilled fear and hopelessness. Jennifer felt how these cruel rituals left invisible scars on the soul of each girl. The room where these meetings took place seemed to be devoid of the light of freedom. Cassandra was a sharp instrument in the hands of Annabelle Montgomery. Such a game of feelings made the girls hostages of an agonizing ideology. Miriam, in her strict traditions, patiently but mercilessly reinforced the rules, not allowing the punctually controlled tolerance to have the slightest room for doubt. Jennifer had seen Edward Sloane's cold gaze more than once, as if it were trying to bore into her. His presence was everywhere, even when he was absent. An invisible web of surveillance, rumor, and threat that extended into the most intimate corners of her being. He was a shadow that would not let go, and to disrupt his plans would be too costly. But Jennifer could not retreat. Allison recounted a shameful and brutal incident in which a student's diary was confiscated. Accusations of disobedience and false thoughts were aired for all to hear, and the punishment was a grim warning. Jennifer's fingers clenched into fists, her heart pounding, a reminder of the fragility of each moment and the brutal violence that lurked behind the mask of discipline. The student's despair, hidden beneath a mask of loyalty and obedience, was reflected in Riley's conversations. She was struggling not only with external tyranny, but also with internal demons, fear for her friends and her own future. There was a ghost of hope for change in her words, like a quiet flame that could flare up and break down the walls of silence. Occasionally, Jennifer caught the unkind glances of the teachers, especially Cassandra, whose movements and gestures clearly spoke of great influence in this system. Behind the facade of pedagogical care lurked a cold machine that subjected the girls to strict, merciless rules. And Miriam Quinn, the head teacher, knew very well the cost of obedience and the price of rebellion. Along with the established order, there was a strong bureaucracy that prevented any attempts at change. Letters from students, whispers of mistreatment, reached the stone walls of the administration and flowed into the abyss of silence. Jennifer felt a secret tension brewing, the source of a key moment in history approaching revelation. In a state of wary friendship and mutual trust, the girls shared their fears and small victories. Bonds grew stronger, sometimes through quiet support, sometimes through more open conversations, and each meeting became a breath of fresh air in a difficult world. For Jennifer, this stage was important in preparing for the much harsher test that lay ahead. At the same time as internal changes, external conflicts were developing. Sloane began to keep a closer eye on the new teacher, summoning her for questioning without direct accusations, but with a clear message to check how much Emily really fits into the inner circle. On the horizon, the understanding appeared that the game was becoming deadly dangerous. While Jennifer delved into the college's dark secrets on the family side, Gideon Frost, the father of one of the victimized students, tried to find the truth in the tangled archives and documents, maintaining contact with Emily and playing along with her in creating an unbreakable network of witnesses. This partnership was a subtle but crucial element in the overall plan for unmasking. Slowly but surely, the tension grew, as if before a storm. Each new piece of knowledge brought both relief from the possibility of helping and fear of what was behind closed doors. Jennifer understood that ahead of her lay a profound clash with a system that would not tolerate strangers stepping into its sacred places. From all the conversations, visits, and inquiries, a mosaic portrait of real college life emerged, where obedience was bought by pressure, where faith was a screen for fear, and where girls were pawns in a dangerous game. Jennifer sensed the approach of a turning point, when the masks would fall and the truth would rise to the surface, exposing the darkest secret. She also understood the true cost of the struggle, not only in personal safety, but also in the trust of her new friends. Every detail, every word could be the key to salvation, or it could become the imprint of a threat in the diary that the girls were so afraid to open. It was a delicate balance, dependent on precision and determination. There were subtle psychological threads that connected every thread of the story, from Allison's quiet gaze, Riley's trembling hands, Annabelle's dark game, and Edward Sloane's brutal discipline. Jennifer knew that every action she took was a catalyst for a major shift, but the cost of failure could be too high. As she finished another day, the heroine noted the importance of maintaining a balance between observation and participation, without breaking her Emily mask, but without losing the human warmth so necessary for the girls' souls. Their stories were too loud to be ignored, and too quiet to listen to indifferently. Now all that was left was to prepare for the coming assault on the system's shelters. Both the external and internal fronts had to unite in a decisive impulse. The students' words of support and trust became a support that could withstand even the most severe tests that the near future promised. And although the clouds hung over the college, a spark of hope lit up inside Jennifer. Fear and helplessness were no longer her only companions. Now she was accompanied by an unwavering desire to see the investigation through to the end, to overcome the invisible walls of fear, to give the victims a voice that no one could silence. All the heroine's steps were now directed toward the moment that was both awaited and feared. It was there that the real fight for the truth would begin, where the price would be higher than ever imagined. But for Jennifer, it was not only justice that was at stake, but also the preservation of herself. In the shadows of the college, confusion was growing. Emily's name was already ringing through the thorny corridors like a silent threat to the established system. And here, in the darkness, for the first time, eyes began to look into the light, ready to illuminate the truth even at the cost of personal pain. It was only the first step on a long road, where each new day could be the beginning of the end or the rebirth of hope. Jennifer knew that her mission was just beginning and that trials lay ahead that would change everyone forever. Shadows of suppression. Jennifer clutched Allison's small book in her palm, her trembling merging with the cold air of the punishment room. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her heart pounded like a hammer, knocking out a resounding drumbeat in her ears. She was at the epicenter of a system where the walls of the college were cages and the smiles of the teachers masked hidden cruelty. Allison, quiet and shy, had already lost her former confidence. Fear burned in her eyes, and her lips trembled, holding back tears and fear. These moments were not just humiliations, they were the work of a system working with cold precision. As Discipline Officer Edward Sloane approached slowly, his footsteps echoed in the silence like a sentence. Jennifer watched as Sloane, his face stone-faced and his eyes sharp, snatched the personal journal from Allison. He hefted the book in his palm several times, like a symbol of authority, before loudly declaring, "This is a forbidden source of sins and revelations. Every word in it is heresy that requires atonement." His voice was impassive, but there was an ominous certainty to it, as if he were both judge and executioner. Sister Annabel stood nearby, radiating a special combination of charisma and menace. Her smooth, pastoral voice quickly filled the room with prayers and instructions, but behind her words hung the shadow of merciless judgment, and she was not shy about using fear as a tool. Jennifer watched as Annabelle slowly approached Allison, paving the way for a public punishment that would strip the girl bare and destroy every last shred of dignity. The people in the room froze, submitting to the ritual. The scene unfolded before Jennifer's eyes, heavy and tense, like an unbearable punishment. Allison stood in the center, her shoulders shaking, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if begging for mercy. Sister Annabelle declared, "You must confess your guilt and repent, or the net of sin will bind you forever." The words were like a blade, causing the girl to feel the heat of humiliation, growing with each passing second. The audience, students and teachers, including Cassandra Ventura and Miriam Quinn, became silent observers who knew the price of such punishment. Jennifer watched with bitterness in her chest as Allison raised her head, her lips whispering quiet repentance, tearing apart the nights and days of hidden fear. Every breath the girl took, every nod was like a fight for survival, for the right to be heard. But the thick walls of the college did not allow mercy. At that moment, Jennifer felt goosebumps appear under her skin. An inner voice warned, "This will not be enough." The system was already strained, and at any moment Sloane could turn the game against her. When the incident was over, Jennifer scanned the faces in the crowd. Riley Winters, Allison's friend, was clenching her fists, her eyes blazing with the quiet determination of resistance. On the other hand, Cassandra Ventura and Miriam Quinn were changing expressions, as if assessing the threat Jennifer posed. She knew she was walking a fine line between being targeted and breaking the system from within. The air around her seemed thick with distrustful glances and latent hostility. Jennifer mentally reviewed everything she had learned about the structure of the college and the secret mechanisms of control. Students' letters were intercepted, complaints were filed away. Not a drop of pain could escape these walls, turning into an endless cycle of manipulation. Sloane and Annabelle were the guardians of discipline behind the mask of holiness, and Cassandra and Miriam were her fingers, translating rules into cruel acts. As Jennifer studied it all, she realized that revealing the truth would require more courage than she expected. Sloane suddenly turned his head, meeting Jennifer's gaze. His eyes, like steel shackles, tried to break through her defenses, to intimidate and break. A wordless minute followed, seconds hanging in the air like weights on strings. Jennifer felt the tension growing inside her, the chain of suspicions tightening around her. This was the beginning of a clear threat that could not be ignored. Every breath was filled with danger, every gesture meant a choice: surrender or fight. In the hallways of college, the whispers of random passers-by became the new standard of fear. Allison hid in a forgotten corner of the library, her eyes empty, her hands shaking from overexertion. Jennifer buried her face in hers, trying to convey silent support and a promise that no one would be left alone in the labyrinth of fear. It was in these moments that the detective's determination was tempered: to fight the system, to expose its flaws, to help those who had fallen victim to false ideals. Succumbing to the growing chaos, Sister Annabelle was about to deliver the final blow to Allison, scheduling a public confession at the next meeting. Jennifer knew she couldn't let that happen. The hidden camera she'd set up earlier was a reliable guide right now, already sending a signal to the outside world. Her gaze flickered to the phone, hope clenching her heart. This was a battle not just for justice, but for every broken soul inside this place. Beyond the college walls, Gideon Frost, the father of one of the injured students, was already assembling a team, preparing to move mountains for the sake of the truth. His calls and messages were a connecting thread between reality and the information Jennifer was getting in the laboratory of devilish discipline. She felt support, albeit from a distance. It raised her spirits and confidence that the forces of darkness are not eternal. Just as the sanctioned punishment was about to unfold, the door to the courtroom burst open and the sounds of approaching law enforcement officers filled the space. Excitement and fear mingled with relief as the shadows of repression began to tremble. The girls, barely familiar with the concept of freedom, felt for the first time that their voices mattered. Jennifer, dropping the mask of resignation, prepared for a new stage, to expose this hidden web of lies and pain. But she knew this was only the first battle. The system was ready to fight back, and the enemies were already coordinating their counterattacks. Jennifer knew there were uncharted paths ahead, new faces of pain and courage. She met Allison's gaze, casting a final look of confidence to the hidden camera. And with a firm resolve, she left the scene to continue the fight, wherever it might lead her. As Jennifer turned the pages of her new mission, she realized that the shadows of suppression were deep and multifaceted, but her will to the truth was unbreakable. This was just part of a larger game, where every sound, every frame, and every breath mattered. And now, leaving college behind, she was ready to step into the next story. More emotional, even more intense, and desperate. The path to freedom was just beginning. Web of lies. Jennifer stood at the window of her modest college dorm room, looking out at the dimly lit backyard. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just unfolded before her. The letters she had taken from one of the girls were real cries for help, erased among religious instructions and rules, but filled with fear and pain. Only recently such messages had passed through her hands, secret, filled with despair. They proved the systemic cruelty hidden behind pious masks. Edward Sloan, cold and unyielding, was not just behind these actions. He was the chief architect of this evil order. Jennifer's encounters with Allison provided a rare source of genuine contact. The quiet, reserved girl, whose every night was filled with fear, gradually opened up to her. Allison told her how letters home never reached their addressees. Sister Annabelle broke the will of young souls with punitive measures and verbal jabs. Teacher Cassandra Venture, like a matrix of perfect evil, instilled fear and severity, using religious dogma as a weapon of manipulation. But it was the tough and manipulative head teacher Miriam Quinn who left the deepest wounds. She controlled not only discipline, but also the emotional state of the girls, turning them into obedient puppets. Behind closed doors in classrooms and dorms, scenes unfolded that defied description. Jennifer heard whispers, suppressed sobs, and complaints that were quickly suppressed by the system. She learned of cases where punishments went far beyond bans on cell phones or diaries. Girls were denied food, forced to kneel for hours, doused with ice water, and sometimes worse, humiliations hidden behind the guise of spiritual trials. All these torments were planned in such a way that no one could report them from the outside, because letters were intercepted, complaints were ignored, or carefully destroyed. Jennifer tried to systematize the information she had received, which required not only precision but also psychological resilience. She saw Allison change before her eyes. The girl gradually gained courage, although fear remained her companion. Riley Winters, Allison's friend and symbol of inner resistance, was ready to fight the system, regardless of the possible consequences, and this gave Jennifer hope. But at the same time, the pressure from Edward Sloan was increasing. In a recent interrogation, he had already hinted that Emily was not who she claimed to be. Every word they said seemed like a clear step toward exposure. The complexities of life support at the college, blocked exits, call monitoring, constant surveillance, made communication with the outside world impossible without high-tech solutions. Jennifer used every available channel, masquerading as a dutiful student, but even that didn't save her from the constant feeling of impending danger. Gideon Frost, the parent of the victimized student, became her support on the outside, helping coordinate law enforcement efforts. His persistent calls and letters emphasized how out of control the situation was and how urgent action was required. One night, as she glided quietly through the halls of the dorm, Jennifer heard a piercing cry from Allison's room. The girl, unable to withstand the system, was breaking down into tears, but did not want to show weakness in front of her comrades. That evening made Jennifer rethink even more strongly that only the attractive facade of the college hid the black emptiness of violence and defenselessness. And it was not just an institute. It was a tool of manipulation into which dozens of young lives were drawn. The morning brought another test. Jennifer ran into Sister Annabelle in the cafeteria. The charismatic and at the same time intimidating woman lashed out with witty words, hinting at the inconsistencies and doubts that flashed through the new student. Her gaze seemed to pierce through, tracking down the slightest signs of resistance. At this moment, Jennifer realized that the psychological pressure would increase, and now every step must be carefully planned so as not to give herself away prematurely. Despite her fear, the detective felt a surge of determination. She knew the violence had to be exposed. The powder keg of tension slowly built up. Every protest the girl made, every cry for help she heard, only increased the sense of hopelessness. But in this darkness, For the first time, glimmers appeared. Small acts of solidarity between students, hidden protest movements, secret meetings under the cover of night. These gestures gave Jennifer the strength to continue. Together with Riley and Allison, they began to gather evidence, risking everything for the chance to get to the truth. Meanwhile, Edward Sloan tightened his grip on the college. New restrictions, increased testing, and intimidation created an atmosphere of oppression. He constantly watched Jennifer, trying to force her to confess, threatening exposure and isolation. The detective felt the pressure growing, and that if she missed the moment, she would lose not only herself but everyone she trusted. The discipline officer used every loophole in the system to hush up any attempts at rebellion. One evening, when Allison brought Jennifer a diary she had found from one of the victims, the detective discovered new letters that no one had seen before. These lines were filled with fear and hope. They were a true testimony of suffering and the desire to change the situation. Inspired by this discovery, Jennifer realized that the main task was not only documenting the crimes, but also helping those who were still trapped. She devised a plan to gather even more evidence and prepare for the final step. Attempts to contact the outside world remained problematic. Phone calls were intercepted, letters failed to reach their destinations. Gideon Frost became an increasingly important link, helping with legal and organizational matters. His persistence and willingness to fight together reminded Jennifer that the truth could prevail if it at least reached the light. The girls' internal resistance was taking on the shape of a real protest movement, albeit a fragile and dangerous one. Moments of tension became more frequent. Jennifer increasingly found herself thinking that there was very little time left before the revelation, but the price of error was too high. Edward Sloan was raging, trying to undermine her hopes, and Sister Annabelle increased moral pressure on the students. But despite all the forces directed against her, the heroine remained unyielding, guided by a strong sense of justice and responsibility to those who entrusted her with their stories. The night hours were filled not only with fear, but also with determination. Jennifer peered into the glowing windows of the building, imagining a complex web of lies and fear. She knew that once she took another step, there would be no turning back. But to remain silent would be to betray all these girls. With each piece of evidence found, with each conversation with Riley and Allison, the wall of alienation melted, opening the way to a solution that would inevitably lead to exposure. At that moment, the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. The gradually thickening darkness around the college seemed to reflect Jennifer's internal struggle, but also promised that light would leak through the strongest locks. The decision on what to do in the coming hours would be fateful. Now it was important not to lose the thread that connected her to the truth. The fine line between trust and betrayal became increasingly visible, and ahead lay the next chapter of the struggle, full of risk, but also the opportunity to restore justice. Interrogation in the fire of suspicion. The cold morning cast a gray light through the college corridors as Jennifer, or Emily as she was known here, stood face to face with Edward Sloan in a cramped interrogation room. His eyes were cold as a bottom, his voice like the rasp of a knife on paper. He had begun with innocent questions about her schedule and her behavior around the students, but the tension was growing with each passing minute. "Do you understand why I'm here, Emily?" he said, and the question was menacing. Jennifer felt the fear that she had known since childhood, torn between submission and truth, tighten in her chest. But inside, she was determined not to break. Soon the psychological game began, played masterfully by Sloan, developing the theme that she could harm the girls with her actions, that her investigation would destroy the peace and order of the college. His words sounded like poison, and his gaze pierced through, as if he saw not Emily's mask, but Jennifer's soul. She clenched her fists tightly, remembering how such accusations paralyzed her in her younger years, when she was accused of disobedience and sinfulness. But this time she could not let fear win, because the stakes were higher, the safety of young girls and their future. She took a step toward objection, but Sloan coldly interrupted her, singing a chant about the importance of discipline in saving souls. Meanwhile, her thoughts flitted, remembering Allison, the quiet, withdrawn student whose fate Jennifer so desperately wanted to change. She feared for her, knowing how Annabelle and Cassandra spun their web of pressure and guilt, extolling divine destiny as a sinister form of control. A voice inside her whispered alarm, and the memories of what she had experienced made her fingers shake and her heart pound. Jennifer remembered giving in to fear one night in the tiny room, Annabelle looking at her with a look that made her want to vanish into thin air. But now, in this interrogation room, she was ready to weather any storm. Sloane was in no hurry to let go of his victim and increased the pressure, aiming for the most vulnerable part, her past and weaknesses. "You must be afraid of being exposed, of being found out as a fake girl," he said mockingly. He knew her secrets better than anyone. After all, his system was watching her every move. But she paused, internally shrinking, but not giving in. The battle in her soul was louder than any words, fear and determination intertwined, scattering a cocktail of emotions capable of throwing anyone off balance. She could almost hear herself breathing, her breathing becoming more even despite her opponent. Suddenly the door opened and Annabelle walked in, like the shadow of punishment itself. Her gaze was soft but deadly, a feigned warmth that hid the cold stones of manipulation she wielded so well. "Everything you do could destroy the souls of the girls you try to save," she said quietly, like a spell. Jennifer responded with a look that did not promise peace, but rather a fight. Now it wasn't just the head of security who stood against her, but the system itself, in the form of Annabelle and her faculty minions, who were waiting for their moment to strike. With each minute of interrogation related to Sloane's suspicions about her true identity, the pressure increased, and the heroine felt the walls closing in, the air growing heavier. Psychological attacks included threats of censure and isolation, accusations of betrayal, and statements that none of the girls were worth the risk of losing their peace for her ideas. But Jennifer remembered conversations with Riley, whose flame of inner resistance was unbroken, and the words of Gideon Frost, who was waiting outside for the signal and ready to intervene. All these unbreakable connections gave her the strength to hold on. In the heat of the interrogation, when it seemed that the pressure could not be withstood any longer, Jennifer said quietly but firmly, "The truth does not fear the light, Edward. You can try to hide everything under the mask of religion, but I am here to stop it." The words sounded like a challenge, and at that moment she activated the hidden camera on her dress, transmitting a signal to the outside world. Sloane turned with wild anger, but he knew that time was against him. The moment had come when all the prepared threats and manipulations collapsed before the power of truth and fortitude. The door was broken down by officers from the department to whom Jennifer had transmitted the signal, and the arrests began. The system, broken from within, wheezed under the onslaught of justice. The girls were finally getting a chance to speak up, to tell their stories, to free themselves from the shackles of fear and violence. There was an atmosphere of tension, pain, but also hope, a symbol that even in the most closed institutions justice can be awakened. Annabelle and Sloane and their subordinates were removed, their power destroyed. After waves of confrontations, Jennifer received a letter from Allison in which she thanked her for saving her and promised not to give up in the fight for light inside the dark walls. Jennifer looked out the window at the evening city leaving, realizing that this was only the beginning of a new mission. New secrets, new trials awaited her ahead, but also a new chance for truth. She took a deep breath, feeling the fire of justice burning in her chest, and headed for the next task, where the shadows of lies were hidden under the masks again. The naked truth. Jennifer stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the cold gazes of those who had held sway over the souls of the girls of the college for so long. Edward Sloane's words came like a bolt from the blue, each sentence filled with poisoned meaning. She was a violator of peace, morality, and discipline. Jennifer's heart was beating so loudly that it seemed as if no one in the room could hear but herself. Each word echoed in her head, making her fingers tremble and her breathing become shallow, as if the air were trying to escape from her mouth and nose. But inside her there was a fire that no fear could extinguish. This was the last fight for the truth. When Sister Annabelle pronounced the sentence, Jennifer felt the cold iron grip of the powers that be. Public repentance would be her humiliation and capitulation, her humiliation, which would capture the girl as broken. But the undercover detective knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of the end. The time for silence was over. It was at that moment, when all eyes merged into a still point, that the hidden camera in her brooch turned on. The small glow of the red light became her last weapon, her voice, which could no longer be silenced. Riley Winters, standing to the side, was fighting back tears, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes alight with a quiet fire of defiance. She knew how much this move meant to all of them, to those who felt trapped and without a voice. Allison Hartwell, quiet and reserved, supported Jennifer with a look as brave and hopeful as she could muster. These girls seemed to be a melody of protest in a song of silence, each of them bearing the weight of inhuman trials. Allison was like a lantern in the darkness, whose weak light promised to find a way to salvation. Sloan frowned at the click of the camera. His manipulative smile faded, replaced by contempt and mild panic. He knew it was a warning sign that the flames of revelation were about to engulf the college. Trying to save face, he raised his voice, trying to stop the process, but his words rang hollow. Jennifer was no longer the woman who hid behind Emily. She had become the voice of those who had been silenced for so long. The teachers, Cassandra Ventura among them, tried to maintain discipline, but even they could not stop the fatal course of events. Senior teacher Miriam Quinn tried furiously to maintain control, but the internal tension in the dynamic environment was too great. Every word, every movement became the last drop of patience for the students, and Jennifer herself. The tension in the air was so thick that it seemed it could be cut with a knife. The tension was growing. Jennifer tried to remain calm, deliberately holding her breath to keep her voice from shaking. Her inner strength and ability to plan step by step kept her steady. Riley was nearby, quietly whispering encouraging words. Allison was relaying hope for the future. And outside the room, Gideon Frost, the father of one of the injured students, was nervously watching the events unfold, ready to intervene at any moment. When Jennifer finally raised her voice, the world around her fell silent, as if it had stopped listening to hear her every word. She spoke of the cruelty that lurks beneath the mask of holiness, of broken lives, of blind submission that plunders the souls of young girls. Her speech was not just an accusation. It was a fight for the right to freedom, to the truth. In her every word there was broken pain and resurgent hope that made hearts beat faster. At that moment, other students, including Riley and Allison, began to speak quietly, but confidently, describing the torture, oppression, and fear they had endured. Each voice became a brick in the wall of resistance that would crumble under the force of truth. It was like a chain reaction, with each story rising and growing louder. The walls of the college, once a symbol of power, were now cracking under the strain that confronted them. Events took an unexpected turn when outside law enforcement officers burst into the room responding to a signal given by Jennifer. Edward Sloan and several other discipline officers were immediately detained. The faces of the authorities who had long built a system of fear now reflected absolute confusion and defeat. This moment became the culmination not only for Jennifer, but for all those who had supported her through her ordeal. Jennifer watched, feeling like her mission was accomplished, but also knowing that this was only the beginning of a long journey. She saw how the girls, once broken, gradually began to find the strength to rebuild. Allison held Riley's hands, tears mingling with a smile, and the image remained in her memory as a symbol of hope and inner strength. The entire system was collapsing, but in its wake came a rebirth filled with pain and light. Later, in the quiet of her office, Jennifer read a letter from a college student. It was a thank you, but also a call to continue the fight against the dark forces that lurked in places like these. She was overcome with emotion, but one thing was clear. This case was just a step in a bigger deal. Jennifer's gaze turned to the window, where the lights of a new city, a new mission, new challenges flickered. As she prepared for the journey, two things were clearly in her mind: the power of truth and the importance of the human voice. The emotional weight of recent events did not allow her to relax, but gave her the energy to move forward. The camera slowly moved away, leaving her on the threshold of a new path, full of secrets and battles for justice. Ahead was a new story, which she was ready to write at the cost of her own soul and mind. And this story was just beginning. Storm of revelation. The unrest on campus had reached a critical point. Jennifer Rose stood in the shade of the thick trees, watching the ambulance and police roll in from the campus. A voice inside her whispered that things might not go as planned, but duty demanded that she move forward. Her fingers slid over the cold metal button on the secret camera. the alarm would go off, and the world would know the truth. At that moment, officers staggered out of the main building, their faces masks of fear and anger. Among them, Discipline Officer Edward Sloan stood out, pale and tense. He knew the game was over. Sloan tried to remain cool, like a seasoned actor on stage, but his eyes betrayed the fear. His ruthless methods of control and surveillance had been exposed by Jennifer and her allies. At his side walked Sister Annabelle, whose charisma radiated intense toughness and danger. She deftly concealed her true nature, using vanity and manipulation as a shield from justice. Their eyes met Jennifer's, full of hatred and despair. They knew their time was up. While law enforcement took the key figures into custody with all due severity, including Cassandra Ventura, the teacher with the cold gaze, and Miriam Quinn, whose toughness had long been agitating the hallways, the girls at the college looked out the window with a soft warmth of hope. Allison Hartwell, quiet and reserved, closed her eyes, allowing herself to breathe for the first time in months. She held the hand of Riley Winters, her trusted friend and symbol of inner resistance. For both, this moment was more than just arrests. It was the beginning of change. The testimonies of the victims became public almost immediately. Girls who had lived in an atmosphere of fear and oppression for years could speak for the first time with a voice that was not drowned out by threats and manipulation. Each story, each breath became a brick in exposing a system built on lies and violence. Riley was about to tell about her experiences, about the endless struggle with conscience and fear, but it was Allison who hid a strength inside herself that Jennifer barely had time to notice. As the storm of retribution raged outside the college, Jennifer felt a pulsation of pain and relief. She knew this fight had been hard fought, but the real war had only just begun. Two forces were at war within her: resilience and the internal wounds of her past, connected to a religious childhood that made her heart clench with memories. Emotions overwhelmed her, from bitterness for those still in the shadows of the system to a quiet hope for justice. Gideon Frost, the father of one of the victims, stood next to Jennifer. His eyes were bright with determination, and his words were full of gratitude and support. He knew that only by working together could they break down the walls of silence and fear that had been hidden behind decades of piety. In this union, hope for a brighter future was born. Together, they felt that change began, not with words, but with every action and every step toward freedom. The heart of the college was still full of secret rooms where suffering and silence continued, but the stones had been moved. Jennifer knew that even the arrests of such powerful figures as Sloan and Annabelle were only the beginning of a long struggle. A system fueled by fear and hypocrisy would not go down without a fight. Every paper held, every tear left an indelible mark on her mind. She promised herself she would not stop, no matter the cost. From that moment on, everything seemed to change. The girls' faces became light, justice was enforced, and the shadows of the college walls grew thinner. Jennifer clenched her fists, feeling the role of not only a detective but also a defender of the dreams of many who could not speak now grow within her. Emotions beat like hearts caught in a storm. But even at this turning point, she knew there were still 2 steps ahead. As the day ended, Jennifer stood quietly near the parking lot, watching the dust from the departing law enforcement cars swirl on the horizon. She looked at Allison and Riley, who were whispering to each other, promising each other not to speak up again. It was a scene filled with the emotion of victory, but also with the fragility of change. As the shadows receded, a light appeared in their place, new, fragile, but real. And as night began to fall on the college, Jennifer Rose was already mentally preparing for the next case, because this fight was only part of a great mosaic of justice and the fight against the shadows of the past. Her voice quietly dissolved in the darkness, promising that the days of silence were over, and ahead, only truth. A look into the future. The cool evening had crept into the closed walls of the college, but the gloom could not hide the effects of the days Jennifer had spent here. She sat in the silence of her temporary office, calmly opening a letter addressed to her from Allison Hartwell. The lines, written in a girlish handwriting, seemed to absorb years of fear and hope at the same time. Each paragraph was not just words, but a piece of the broken soul that Allison shared with someone who could understand and support. Dear Emily, I know now that the truth is more important than any fear. Thanks to you, I see the light, she wrote, recalling how difficult their path to freedom was. The faint smell of ink mingled with the tension in the room as Jennifer read on. Allison described how, for the first time in months, she had allowed herself to smile, to feel like her voice mattered. Moments when Riley Winters, her trusted friend, had shown inner strength, speaking up for those who were being held down, came flooding back. Each word echoed with struggle, reflecting the fragility and determination of young girls who had found the courage to stand up to the system even when it seemed like their strength was failing them. Outside, the ominous silence reminded me of Edward Sloan and Sister Annabelle, whose dark figures still loomed over the place. But now they were removed, and the college was slowly beginning to recover from its oppression. Jennifer felt the weight of responsibility. This was not just an investigation. It was a challenge to the entire system. Every step she took, carefully thought out and verified, changed the fates of those girls who remained there, and those who were just beginning their path in this closed world. Remembering her meeting with Gideon Frost, the father of one of the injured students, she felt the weight on her soul shared with each of his grateful words. Gideon, a man with fire in his eyes, became not only an ally for Jennifer, but also a symbol of the fact that true justice requires not only courage, but also fortitude. His endless patience and determination to support his daughter and all the victims became the real energy of the new stage of the investigation. Jennifer stared at the photographs Gideon had sent her, one of Allison, now confident and open, her eyes shining with a new life, free of fear and shame. It was a victory not only for the detective's motor skills, but also for the deep human compassion she had put into every word, every action. But it was also clear to her that there was much more to come. The fight against such institutions had left its mark on many souls, and it required constant vigilance, lest the darkness return. Jennifer's memory returned to the moment when the camera, hidden under her clothes, captured her humility and public repentance under the stern gaze of Edward Sloan. The security officer's gaze, full of merciless coldness, could not suppress the spark of resistance that ignited in the heroine's heart. Then, at that very moment, she understood. This is not only her story, but the story of many girls whose voices were silenced for years. It was this moment that marked the beginning of the end of their tyranny. The letters from students that Jennifer helped smuggle undetected were replete with descriptions of harsh punishments, ignoring real problems, and the complete impunity of a corrupt disciplinary system. Cassandra Ventura and Miriam Quinn continued their manipulations, but now without cover, without fear of being found out. Every word they spoke was an attempt to maintain their creeping control, but their methods, fear and shame, no longer worked as effectively after the world learned the truth. Allison and Riley were no longer seen as victims, but as symbols of resistance and hope. Despite their initial isolation, they became key witnesses whose testimony helped bring to light what the college system had hidden. Through hours of conversation and interviews with Jennifer, mutual trust grew, allowing the barriers of silence to be broken and much of the broken lives to begin to be restored. Jennifer sighed softly. She had spent years struggling to separate herself from her trauma, but now she was learning to accept it as a part of her strength, to be shared. Each story the students told was a reminder that no matter how many tangled webs of lies existed, openness and cooperation had the power to break through even the thickest walls. These thoughts gave her the confidence to keep moving forward, to where justice could still prevail. The camera, hidden near the office window, absorbed the last moments of peace before the next storm. Control of the situation was passing into the hands of others, those who understood the value of freedom and were ready to defend it with all the strength of their spirit. Jennifer packed her things, feeling how new goals were already beckoning her gaze into the distance. Somewhere beyond, in the world, new secrets were waiting, new people whose stories also required light and protection. Allison's letter ended with words of gratitude and a promise to be strong despite all the trials. This thin thread of hope connected the heroine with everyone for whom a new day had long since arrived. There was no longer a need for pretense. The truth was out. College in Utah became less of a closed fortress and more the beginning of a change that Jennifer was proud of. Slowly, with a little weariness, but with a firm resolve, Jennifer closed the office door behind her. The camera captured her last look at the nameplate with the name Emily, symbolizing the closing of one chapter of her life. Now the story continued in a new direction, one step away from the next investigation, where her mind, heart, and unbroken will to stand for those who cannot defend themselves would once again go. With her determination wrapped in the warmth of newfound friendships and triumphs, Jennifer walked out to the front door of the college. Something bigger than just work was calling her, a burning mission for change that brooked no pause or hesitation. Every step became a symbol of the fight against oppression, every breath a reminder that evil could be defeated. And this was only the beginning.